Hi, good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Bernardes. I am Program Manager here with the SMT Policy Fellowships at AAAS. I will be your moderator for today's live chat. The live chats are an opportunity for you to learn more about the fellowships. It'll give you an opportunity to learn about the different placements and opportunities that are for fellows. It also is an opportunity for you to find out how the fellowships can transform your career. The fellowship is also, or the live chat is also an opportunity for you to learn more about the science policy interface. And of course, these live chats is an opportunity for you to ask questions to our fellows. So listed here on this slide is our upcoming live chat conversation within the next few months. Finally, okay, sorry about that. I'm experiencing some technical difficulties here. Okay. Right, and on this slide, so joining us today are two fellows, Drs. Peter Winter and Ankunda Kariisa, and they are here to share with you their experiences of the fellowship, specifically a day in the life of an STPF policy fellow. And so, of course, they will be here live for you to, for them to answer your questions. On this slide, you can see the fellowship's goals and strategies, but let me provide you a little overview of the fellowships. So the fellowship is a year-long immersive policy experience. Fellows represent a wide range of backgrounds, scientific backgrounds, as well as career stages. We have fellows that are early career, mid-career, and senior career. And again, you know, their backgrounds range in science, engineering, social sciences, and health medical sciences. The fellowship is a professional development opportunity for fellows or for you to bring in your STEM expertise to policy to gain a stronger understanding of how the federal government works, how policy affects science. It's also an opportunity for you to build a large network with fellows, with alumni, with agency administrators, and also with policy thought leaders. However, the fellowship is not a postdoc experience, okay? AAAS, we offer opportunities in the 3 branches of government. We have the executive branch fellowships, which are in federal agencies. Fellows, this is usually our largest group of fellows with about 150 placements each year. We also offer fellowships in the legislative branch. AAAS sponsors 2 congressional fellows each year, but we also have partner societies in the science and engineering societies in order to sponsor a fellow there. The judicial fellowship placements is typically held at the Federal Judiciary Center, and the FJC is a research and education agency to the Judiciary branch. And finally, applicants can and should consider applying to 1 or more of the fellowships. So for example, if you're interested in applying to the executive branch and also applying to congressional, we welcome the opportunity for you to apply. And you can learn more about each of the program areas, including the host offices, by clicking Become a Fellow on the fellowship website. On this slide, you will see our eligibility criteria. So the eligibility requirements are you need to be a U.S. citizen with a doctoral degree in science or in engineering. Applicants who has a master's in engineering can apply. However, they will need to have, this is the right slide. However, they will need to have 3 years professional experience following receiving their master's in engineering. Also for the judicial fellowship, 3 years of postdoctoral experience. So after you've earned your degree, then we ask that you have 3 years professional experience. All right, I'm receiving some feedback that you all are frozen on the second page. So thank you for sharing with me. Let me see if I can troubleshoot here. I do apologize for the inconvenience. Are you able to see me turn the slides now? Okay, thank you. All right, perfect, full screen now. All right, thank you. So this is where I covered in terms of the fellowship areas. As I mentioned, the executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch, and then we also have our Roger Revelle fellowship, but that's offered every 4 years. And of course, I mentioned the criteria, needing to have a postdoctoral degree, master's in engineering. You are eligible to apply if you also have 3 years professional experience. And for our judicial fellowship as well, have a PhD in 3 years professional experience. Also, the application cycle will open from August 1st to November 1st for the 2019-20 fellowship year. The deadline, I mentioned November 1st, is to apply for the 19-20 year. The fellowship begins the following year, September 1 through August 31st. It is a full-time commitment in the host offices, and the fellowship is in the Washington, D.C. area. Of course, visit the fellowships for complete details about the program and eligibility and the application process. Finally, our panelists. So today joining us, we have Dr. Ankunda, Kariisa, and Dr. Peter Winter. Ankunda is a current fellow at the U.S. Agency for International Development, also known as USAID. She leads USAID's digital finance team's monitoring, evaluation, and learning efforts. She also plays a key role in supporting the team's sector integration work with a specific focus on global health. She holds a PhD in microbiology and immunology from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Dr. Peter Winter is a current fellow at the Department of Energy in the Advanced Manufacturing Office. He serves as an advisor to the director of the Advanced Manufacturing Office on energy technology policy issues, including advanced manufacturing materials and processes, energy efficiency, and technology transfer. Peter holds a PhD in cell and molecular biology from Colorado State University. I also want to mention that Peter also completed a congressional fellowship in 2015-16, and he was sponsored by the Optical Society and Materials Research Society. He served his fellowship in the office of Senator Chris Coons. And so he's able to provide us with both the executive branch perspective as well as congressional branch perspective. So again, I'd like to thank you all for that brief presentation. So we're going to turn the table over to our panelists. And so for our opening question, can you both share, prior to joining the fellowships, at that point in your career, why were you interested in pursuing the fellowships? So Peter, I'll let you take this one, and then followed by Ankunda.
Sure. Well, hello everyone, and thank you, Cynthia. So yeah, when I first decided to take the fellowship, I was a postdoctoral fellow at the National Institutes of Health, I was in a lab that built super resolution microscopes. I'd been there about 3.5 years, and I'd enjoyed my research, but I kind of found myself becoming less and less interested in my specific area of research and more interested in things outside of my line of research, things outside of my agency. The National Institutes of Health is located just outside DC, so I had a lot of friends that were working in policy, friends that were working for federal agencies or that were lawyers, and I just found myself becoming more and more interested in things that were science adjacent, but not necessarily my research itself. I was lucky that the NIH had a good educational program, so I became aware of the AAAS fellowships, and after doing informational interviews with folks that had them previously, I thought to myself, wow, this seems really exciting, seems really interesting. I'm not sure if I'm gonna be good at it, but I know that I don't really want to become a professor, and so I gave it a shot, and it's been fantastic.
Awesome. Ankunda?
So yeah, at the time of before I applied for this fellowship, I was also a postdoc. And the reason I decided to do a postdoc was because I was still interested in doing research, but I just didn't know, I didn't know if I wanted to stay in research or if I wanted to sort of try something else. So the postdoc was an opportunity for me to think more about what I wanted to do and really come to the decision about whether or not I wanted to pursue a research career or to move on. And in my postdoc, I was a little bit strategic in the sense that I picked an organism that I believe would help me get into the international development space. So I was working on antibiotic resistance, and I knew it was a global problem, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, and I thought, well, this is something that I could leverage as a knowledge base for moving into international development if I chose to, but it's also something that I could pursue a research career doing. And after about 1.5 years of the postdoc, I realized that I wasn't really as excited about doing research as I was as a grad student. So I ended up taking a risk, essentially. I didn't really know much about USAID and what it did, but I did know that it was one of the main donors in the international development space. So I figured, this fellowship is an opportunity for me to work with one of the biggest players in this space without actually a lot of experience. I was basically trusted because I have a PhD and I went through the application process that I could do the work. So it was an opportunity for me to try something completely different and take a huge risk. I'd never worked outside of a research lab. So, but I'm really glad I did it. I've always thought about working in this space. I just didn't really know how to get into it. And I think the fellowship, what was unique about it when I saw it was that it provided me with the opportunity to get work experience and potentially move back into research if I wanted to, or to stay in this new field. And it was recommended to me from somebody that was a research scientist and decided to move away from the bench and work in international development. And this was her way of doing that. And so when she recommended I apply for it, I looked into it and agreed that it was probably a really good fit for me. So, yeah.
Awesome. So this is actually a great segue. And folks that are participating, please feel free to submit your questions. So both of you kind of took this risk and applied for the fellowships. So why policy? Was it your postdoc experience that kind of exposed you to policy? Where were you, or rather, how did you gain interest in policy? So I'll let Peter take this one.
Sure. So for me, my initial interest in policy kind of came from just kind of being in the DC area, right? If I was located out in Bethesda, Maryland, and you just kind of can't, it's impossible to avoid policy in some sense, right? When you live here. But once I started talking to folks that had, jobs at places like USAID or working for nonprofits or think tanks, after a few years of interacting with these folks, I specifically tried to join and become engaged in a number of opportunities. So I joined the Biophysical Society's Public Affairs Committee. I worked on a grant review committee for the Optical Society. I started working with a nonprofit that was doing startup challenges at the National Institutes of Health. So it was an outside organization that had acquired some funding and was able to secure the rights to technologies at the NIH, and that was a lot of fun. And then I also started working on the NIH's Scientific Conduct and Ethics Committee. And I really realized that I enjoyed this stuff. I enjoyed building consensus around ideas. I enjoyed the kind of outward-facing roles, the interaction with other people, and I really just kind of realized that, yeah, this is enjoyable.
I think for me, so before I applied for the fellowship, I started to do a lot of informational interviews with people about their work in international development. And the most common thread across all of those informational interviews, and even I did some courses online and also at the university that I was working at as a postdoc, and USAID always came up. And so it's really the #1 donor. It not only funds programs internationally that deal with development problems, but also universities that are addressing these issues. And so I just felt like understanding how the government decides to invest as much money as they do in international development was going to be really key no matter where I decided I wanted to end up. So I knew that this would be a great entryway into this field. And I think my position doesn't necessarily deal with policy in a very direct way. It's more about understanding how the policies are implemented and sort of what Congress is looking for when it comes to the work that we do, and what foreign governments are interested in when it comes to the work that we do. So it's more about understanding how these things work and how different pieces are coordinated with each other. I wouldn't say that I necessarily influence policy in my day-to-day. And that's not really what I was looking for. It was more about understanding how USAID as a donor, as an international player, works in the space of international development.
Thank you. So can you all so we received the question, how much of an impact would you say you made on policy on a day-to-day basis, and any examples? So Peter, you worked on the Hill, or you served on the Hill your first year, and now you're at DOE. I'm kind of interested in your response to this question, talking about your day-to-day with policy. So
absolutely. So in my role on the Hill, we influence policy through 2 ways. So I worked for a Senate appropriator, so that allowed my office to have access to the actual dollars that are spent by the federal government, whether that's in science or defense or international development programs. My boss is on that committee. We were a part of that process. Stakeholders come to us and advocate on behalf of their issue, and we then do our best to fight for the things that we think are needed. So that's one way to influence policy on the Hill. I also I wrote multiple bills. So I went to my boss with ideas, and I said, hey, I think we should get in this space, and we should rework this program or authorize this program over here. And we wrote bills on it. We worked with stakeholders. We got bipartisan support, and 2 of my bills were actually signed into law by President Obama in the former administration. So that is a direct impact on policy. In the executive branch, for me at least, it's slightly different. I serve as an advisor to our director, and so I help our kind of behind the scenes help develop our programmatic activities. So that's kind of where are we going to direct our resources in the material science and manufacturing space. But then I also manage 3 programs. And so in that side, I'm very much engaged in how are those programs developed? What do they look like? Who are we admitting into the programs? It's a fellowship program itself. So I'm a fellow managing a fellowship program, which is pretty interesting. And it's a lot of fun. So we have a direct impact, but it's very different between the legislative and the executive branch.
Yeah, I'll say similar to Peter's experience at DOE, USAID, again, we have resources that are allocated to us, resources meaning money essentially, and we work with implementing partners to conduct the work on the ground. So for me, the way that I engage with an implementing partner is there are several different projects that we'll decide we want to do a project in, let's say Rwanda or some other country that we work in. We'll write a scope of work on what it is we want to do. We'll identify somebody that can do the work, and then sort of coordinate with people on the ground and our implementers on how we're going to execute this this plan. And so the way that has impact on policy, I think, is you know, you have to come up with a good project or good design for the work that you want to do. You have to have clear objectives for what it is you want to achieve. You have to monitor the work that you're doing and making sure that your implementers are hitting their targets. And all that information you gather, you feed back up to senior leadership, and senior leadership feeds that back up to Congress. And so the more impactful your work is on the ground, which is what we design projects in order to have impact, the more that gets translated up to senior leadership, and then the more they can advocate for you when it comes to, you know, the next fiscal year and monies being allocated. So it's not necessarily the policy language is changing, but our programs are better supported by the work that, if we do good work, our programs are better supported. And if our programs are better supported, we can actually have greater impact. So it's mainly around how to manage projects and how to have impact through the projects, and then just, you know, as best as you can, tell your story so that you know, Congress or whomever can look down and say, well, we really like this program because they had a lot of impact, and we want to talk about it, and we want to share it, and we think more resources should go towards this.
So you guys have very great experiences thus far in your offices. You guys sound like, you know, you've been in government for quite some time. But let's talk about the transition from being a scientist and then entering into this federal government sphere. So how was the transition for you? How did you prepare? How did you prepare for your role or for your fellowship? So you kind of was touching on it, Ankunda, so I kind of want you to continue in regards to your transition.
Yeah, it was a huge, and I think I'm still transitioning. I started my fellowship in September, so about 10 months in, and I'm renewing for a second year, so I'll get another year in this office and get to do a lot more things. But I think it was a very difficult transition. So I went from, it was exciting though as well, not difficult in a bad way. But I went from being a microbiologist, working at a bench, doing essentially basic science research, to working in an office and thinking about, you know, agriculture, education, global health, humanitarian assistance, and then within those sectors, thinking about it in the lens of digital finance, which that's a whole, it's a new field for me. It's not complicated, but it's basically a tool that that we use to have impact in these different sectors. And so we're interested in how can we provide people that are at the base of the pyramid, rural populations, with access to just financial services that can help improve their lives. And so that's something I'd never thought about really until I got into this job. So a lot of this has been a learning, understanding terminologies, taking courses, talking to people, understanding what other people are doing, a lot of self-study and reading up on things. So it's been a very steep learning curve, but I feel like it's one of those, it's a rare opportunity after you've finished a postdoc. You know, you're pretty far advanced in your career, or at least you've been doing the same thing for quite a while, to have an opportunity to do something completely different. I think I'm quite fortunate, and all the other fellows as well, who've been able to like come into a new position and learn something new. It's quite rare to be able to do that at this stage in your career, and I think it only really makes you stronger. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to say that you switched fields midway, you know, especially if you can show that you've accomplished something. So yeah, I think I'm still learning. It was completely different shift. It's not only a different work environment, but different subject matter. And also I think having a cohort of fellows, so we're a huge cohort, there's over 100 of us, and everybody is going through a transition. And so being able to rely on that network to support you when you feel like you're just, messing up or whatever. Just knowing that you're not alone and that they hired you not because you're an expert in this field, but they hired you because they thought you could bring new and interesting ideas. And so just, sort of understanding like your limitations, but then also trying to absorb and learn as much as possible so you can have impact while you're here, because it's not a very long fellowship.
So Peter, you touched on it also. You shared with us your exposure to the policy realm or exposure to the federal government realm here. You went from, scientist to postdoc to congressional fellow to executive branch fellow. Can you provide some input in regards to how you prepare for the transition for each?
Sure. So I think there's kind of two ways to answer this. So if you're interested in the fellowship, I think, there's the transition that is, building up a resume that makes you competitive for the fellowship. And on that note, I'd say to the audience, do sign up for anything and everything that's outside of your research. That's the starting point. Just start doing things that aren't your basic research, and you'll find it'll help build your interest, it'll help build your skill set, but it'll also make you, more competitive for the fellowship. Now, once you've gotten the fellowship, before you start it, information interviews are a gold mine. You should, and you should be doing this as a scientist too, right? Talking to other people who are successful in the area and the things you want to do, asking them about their life story, about the way they go about solving problems, what they do on a daily basis. That's the best way to prepare for anything, I think. And then I'd say as I transitioned into the fellowship, Ankunda was very right. It's a very different environment. When I was a scientist, I had my own room, I had a laser table, and I built microscopes. I was spent my days aligning lasers and writing Python code. But at its heart, what I was doing was coming into the day and trying to solve a problem. Every day I had a new problem, and I was trying to solve that problem, and it was up to me to find the solution. That's the same thing I do in government. Problems come in through my inbox instead of from my advisor, and my job is to solve them. Normally that means building consensus with folks that are kind of below us in the pecking order and above us in the pecking order, and it's up to me to go about figuring out how to get people to yes. Except instead of aligning a laser or figuring out how to, program a deconvolution algorithm, now I'm trying to get somebody to agree, a lawyer to agree to the terms of a CRADA, or I'm trying to get, another agency to help me, agree to the terms of a memorandum of understanding or something like that, or I'm trying to get somebody to sign off on a selection statement for a grant, and they're asking me questions about the scope of work that's listed. But in the end, really the job is you come in and you have to be creative about solving problems.
You've touched on something, application. So what do you think what did you think you put on your application that made you a standout candidate to be a fellow? So I want you to, Peter, and then I'm gonna transition to Ankunda.
Sure. So what I would advise the applicants is realize that everybody applying to the fellowship has a PhD. So if you're trying to stand on your PhD, it's not going to work, because every single person applying also has a PhD in something that sounds very interesting and exciting. You're going to need to differentiate yourself with other activities, other skills. You're going to need to differentiate yourself with how you write your personal statement about your passion for an issue or for policy in general. And then you're going to need to be able to differentiate yourself in how you write your memo, and showing that you understand, the difference between being a scientist and being a policymaker. So that's what I would advise. But the good thing is going about that process. So for me, joining the Scientific Conduct and Ethics Committee at the NIH, put me at a table with the directors of institutes at the NIH. That was a place where I didn't deserve to be, in the sense that I'm a postdoc and they're 50-year-old tenured research scientists at the NIH. But I was able to learn from them, and I was able to build their trust in me by contributing to the conversations. And that, I think, is really what differentiated me, was that when I on paper, I had a diversified experience, but then in my interview, I was able to show that that experience was real, right? That it wasn't just on paper, that I had lived it, and I could explain how and what I'd learned from those opportunities.
Yeah, I think also I totally agree with Peter. I think try to diversify your resume as much as possible. But then also I would say for me, I think what stood out, or what I think helped, I'm not 100% sure, but I tried to keep it as consistent as possible. So I expressed that, you know, I'm a scientist and these are the research projects that I did, and I was, you know, this is what I accomplished as a scientist. I'm interested in international development. And I kind of stuck with that as the theme. And so the way that I did that was I took courses. So I was a postdoc and I got highly subsidized courses that I could take. I think I only had to pay a couple $100. So I decided to sign up for a few graduate level global health classes at the university where I was at. I also took some online courses which were free. And got a certificate or like a completion certificate from those showing that I had this basic, very basic interest in global health and international development. And those didn't take up a whole lot of time. And then I, you know, talked a lot about why I wanted to get into this field in my personal statement. I gave personal examples and I talked about, you know, how I thought my skills as a researcher would help me do this other thing. And, you know, doing the informational interviews can kind of help you identify what types of things you should talk about. And so I kept it consistent for the most part. I really wanted to get into USAID or the State Department. I wanted to do something where I'd have some role as working in international development. And so keeping it consistent, and then yeah, once you get to the second stage, there's a memo that you have to write. And for that, I just got I talked to a lot of people. This is when I connected with, this is when I was like, oh, this is actually real. I could get this fellowship when I made it to that stage. And I started to reach out to all the people I knew on LinkedIn that had done this fellowship before and got advice from them and just talked to as many people as I could to get a sense of what the memo should look like and also what to expect when I was defending my memo during the second round of interviews. And so it was really at that point that I started to reach out to the AAAS network to better understand like how I could really, you know, get past this stage. But for the first round, I'd say, yeah, just be, you know, think outside this research box, but then try to keep it focused. If you're all over you want to show that you have an idea of where you want to be, at least in government, or what you want to do, or why you want to be there. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to be an expert, but it shows that, you know, there's a goal in mind for you. And I think that was really important for my application.
So while you all are in your fellowship in this lovely political atmosphere we're in right now, you know, how are you guys heavily impacted within the political atmosphere in your offices? Can you talk a little bit about that, and how does it affect science in the offices that you're in? So Peter?
Yes, so, you know, it was interesting because when I first joined in my original fellowship, I was in Congress, and, you know, I thought I was going into a policy world, and in Congress everything is political. So the minute you show up, you know, you have to pick, are you a D, are you an R, right? That depends on, you know, what office you're going to join. Once you join an office, you know, that's your team. And you know, everything becomes a political issue. So from the congressional side, it's very politicized. But what I would say is actually, you know, my time on the Hill encouraged me. It made me more optimistic about politics and the nature of you know, of our political system, because the staff on the other side of the aisle were wonderful. You know, we'd have on TV, you have, it looks like the world's exploding, but I can sit down with you know, Republican offices and have, you know, a real conversation on a real issue, you know, 5 days a week. Like, that was happening all the time. So that actually was encouraging. In the Department of Energy, there's definitely been a shift over, you know, when the administration changed. But to be honest, you know, our day-to-day activities haven't really changed. You know, the presidential budget requests have been lowered, so that can cause some frustration for folks. But our appropriation dollars have come through in the end, so our actual activities haven't really been reduced. They've actually expanded in my office. And basically what's happened is you just have a new team of political folks that are asking a different set of questions about what the career staff are doing. But for us, they really haven't changed what we're able to do. They're just kind of they're making us justify to them in a way that wasn't the same as the folks before.
Yeah, I'll say there's a few ways that the change in administration has impacted our work. And I think something to keep in mind is every time there's a change in administration, there's going to be a change in the way that you do work at your agency. So I mean, this was expected coming in. This was expected for this for these last couple of years, that every time there's a new turnaround, you expect changes. Everybody has to leave their mark in a particular way, and so they usually there will be some change. And so for us, the way that it's changed is, interestingly, our budget wasn't actually hit very hard. I think it was expected to be, but what actually ended up coming through was a little bit more than what we expected based on the previous year. So we came out with a lot of resources this year. However, although we have more resources, because of the change in administration, you get a huge shift in personnel. So we had there was a hiring freeze, and there were a lot of people that were leaving positions at the agency. And so I think what that created was a bit of a void. And so people's responsibilities shifted. So from the time that I joined my office, we've shrunk by about 50% in 6 months. So our team went down by half. But now we're acquiring more people. So now it's growing again. So I went from doing one very small project, thinking I wouldn't have a huge role, to now acquiring like a bunch more responsibilities, only because we were short. And it's unfortunate that we lost some really great people, but at the same time, it allowed me to take up a lot more responsibility. So I don't know, like it's one of those situations where I wish those people were still there, because there's a lot that I could have learned from them, but it also allowed me to kind of just dive right in and learn things really, really quickly and be able to do really cool stuff. So I think that's the shift, at least in my agency, and specifically in my center, was we didn't really get hit with loss of resources, but we did get hit with just a lot of shifting in personnel and manpower and capacity, which I think people expected and people adapted to quite well. I think that's true across the government because of the hiring freeze, that probably a lot of people saw that going on. But
so I'm going to get to some more questions, and we've sort of hit them, most of them. One person asked, any tips for approaching conversations with a postdoc advisor for making time for experiences to prepare for the STPF fellowship, and for example, not bench work? So anyone want to take a stab at this? Ankunda, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I think so. For me, I think if you're maybe starting off with a postdoc, or you're early in your postdoc, I would say as soon as possible, talk to your PI about what you're thinking long term, just so that it's on the table. So when it comes to submitting a letter of recommendation, it's not a complete surprise to them that you're thinking of switching fields. When it comes to making time, that was hard for me as a postdoc. I told you I took some courses, and it really meant that for that semester, I ended up spending more time in the later hours in the lab, because I was making up for the couple hours a week I was spending away doing other stuff, doing these other courses and doing other coursework. So it was a bit of a sacrifice, and I sold it. That's the way I pitched it, was that I'm not going to cut back on my hours in the lab. I'm just going to be doing this one additional thing. My hours will be shifted, but I'll be doing the work I need to do. So just as long as you can like sort of guarantee them that the work will get done. If you have if it's a difficult situation, there are some advisors that are very happy about you taking on, especially because they understand that maybe you might not want to go into research as a career or become an academic researcher. They might be more open to that, but if they're not open to that, I'd say just try to, convince them that this is something that might take you out of the lab from 9 to 5 or in those 9 to 5 hours, but you'll be, supplementing that and doing the work that you need to do to accomplish your goals in the lab outside of the 9 to 5 schedule. And usually it's temporary. That was the case for me. It was only a semester really that I ended up having to do that. But yeah, as much as you can communicate with them, letting them know what your plans are ahead of time, and then also if it comes to negotiating hours, working with your advisor to make sure that everything gets done, and but you can somehow still fit in what you need to do. Yeah, it was a bit challenging for me, to be honest, but I knew it's what I wanted to do, so I just just sucked it up and had that hard conversation, and eventually it worked out and it was fine.
Peter, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so this I think applies to everything, was have a direct conversation about your desires with your advisor. With my advisor, he, and if they're not willing to support you in what you want to do and your path forward, that's on them, right? That's a shortcoming on their end, not on your end. So, with my advisor, we had a direct conversation. He basically, I was in a lab where I was kind of expected to be there from like 8 to 8:30 to about 7 at night. And it was like, wow, well, when am I going to find the time to do this if I'm supposed to be in your lab 10 and a half, 11 hours a day? And so I had a conversation, and we basically came to the point where I said, okay, I need milestones. I need you to set up something whereby which instead of it's my time here, it's my accomplishments. And basically he said, I was working on 2 projects where I was building 2 unique microscopes. And he said, okay, if you can build these microscopes and get these papers out, I'll give you, whatever recommendation you want for whatever path you want to pursue, because you'll have accomplished what I need out of it, and I'll be satisfied. And he said, to the extent that you're going to go do things that are outside of the lab on a daily basis, that's fine, but on a week-to-week basis, I'm going to ask you what you've accomplished. And if I get to a week where you haven't accomplished enough, I'm going to let you know, and then we're going to have to make a change. So like I said, I have a direct conversation would be my advice. Find some sort of concrete milestone, objective-based, goal-based system, and then try and get them to allow you to work in what you need to do.
I have one question that talks about the fellowship as a whole. I'll read this to you all. It says, what is the dynamic between fellows and AAAS? Besides doing the work expected of you in your placement agency or in your office, what is expected of you from the fellowship itself? Are there activities, events required for all fellows, or are you the only one, or are you only reporting to your agency? I think we could all answer this question, but from the fellows' perspective, of course, answer this question. So I'll let Peter answer that, and then followed by Ankunda.
Yeah, so I guess when the fellowship starts, there's a training, an orientation. I've now done that 3 times. But the first couple times it was very informational and very educational for me. But normally there's kind of, on the front end, there's requirements from AAAS. And then as you get into your fellowship, the majority of your time is dedicated to the work that your office is giving you. I think every office is different. What I've tried to do is I've tried to get my office to treat me as much like an actual employee as possible. That's what I wanted. I wanted them to give me as much work as possible, as much rope as possible, I guess, for me to get myself in trouble with. And hopefully I don't get in trouble with it. And so that's been my approach. But I've also made sure to let them know that I do expect to be allowed to leave the office for events that are affiliated with AAAS. I think I'm signed up for a design thinking workshop on Thursday that's coming up, so I'm excited about that. So I've been doing those things for the last 3 years. There's events every couple of weeks that you can go to, but I also do things that are not affiliated with AAAS. You know, whether that's a think tank event, an evening happy hour with a nonprofit. You know, there's many opportunities to do things that are not your actual work. And you know, AAAS is pretty flexible. You don't have to go to most of these things, but they're there if you want them. But the other thing I would say is, you know, my agency also has things that I can do that are outside of my work stream, and they're not affiliated with AAAS, but I have expectations to go to those. And actually, most of this stuff is good. You know, the point of the fellowship is to broaden your experience. And so if you show up and all you want to do is sit at your desk and do your work, similar to the way you thought possibly as a scientist, then you're not taking advantage of the fellowship opportunity. The goal is to get out into DC, meet people that do different things, build a network, diversify your experience, and you know, and then figure out what you're really passionate about.
That was well said. For the interest of time, I want to know, so what is life after the fellowship looking like, especially for you, Winter, Peter, as you know, this is almost your final year in the fellowships. So
I'm looking at the calendar. I've got 4 weeks, 4.5 weeks, 5 weeks, sorry. So I at the end of my first year at DOE, which was the end of my second year of fellowship experience, I went to my boss and I explained to him that I wanted to stay for a third year, but that, you know, I was going to start looking for positions external to the office, and he was very supportive because he wants me to succeed too. So over the last year, I applied to many positions, had various interviews, and received a number of offers. But every time that I looked at one of the offers I was given and thought about what my role in my office was, I realized that I'd rather do the work I currently do. So I'm actually going to be transitioning to a contractor status at the Department of Energy in my office in September. So for me, not a whole lot will change, except I will no longer be a fellow. I will be a contractor to the Department of Energy through an external organization. We don't need to get into the details of how that works at DOE, but so I'll be non-fed, but I will still be working in my office, and not a whole lot's going to change with my role, and I'm happy about that.
Awesome, congratulations, Ankunda.
Yeah, congrats, Peter. That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, so for me, I still have another year left. I'm actually going to be doing a fellowship within my fellowship in the coming year. So I signed up for an Embassy Science Fellowship, which is an opportunity that is open to anybody, I think, in the federal government to go and work at the State Department, work at an embassy. So it's through the State Department. And you apply to work on a particular project. If you get accepted, you can go there. So in January, I'll be doing that fellowship in West Africa and Ivory Coast. So that I'm doing as a way to, one, get some international work experience, and two, also just develop more contacts, learn more about what's happening in country, and just to help me figure out what I want to do next. I would love to stay in development, international development. I don't know that I have to necessarily stay at USAID because I feel like there's so many people working in this space in DC and abroad and even across the US. I would love to stay here. If there's an opportunity, it'd probably be something like the contractor position. And I know quite a few fellows that have actually taken on positions at USAID after being a fellow, and they're contractors and they're here years later. So that's an opportunity. That might be an option for me. I just don't know what the hiring situation will be like at the end of next year, end of my fellowship year next year. But I'm just keeping my options open. I think generally this experience has made me want to stay in this field. I definitely want to find another position in this field, but I don't know exactly yet where that's going to be.
Okay. So as we transition, because we are close to time, there was a question from the audience asking specifically about those with MDs. and can they apply to the fellowship? And so my response to you is that MDs can apply, and it is treated as, PhD. And so we, we review you similar to how we review applicants from, the sciences, engineering. If you feel as if you need additional residency in order to apply to the program, that is at your discretion. However, we have accepted MDs into our program. So finally, in the interest of time, both of you, again, thank you so much for participating as a panelist today. Last question, what advice would you give to someone who is applying to the fellowships? I mean, I know we've kind of been providing tips and pointers throughout our conversation today, but if you guys can leave final words for anyone who's interested, what would that be? So Ankunda, I'll turn to you first.
I would say think about what you want to gain out of the experience. And once you identify that, I would start to build that out as much as possible. So if you say you want to work in Congress for a congressman or a congresswoman, then learn a lot about what issues they care about. Maybe learn about how Congress works, talk to other congressional fellows, just hone in on that as much as possible. So when it's time to write your application, you're coming in with a little bit of background knowledge that shows that you've been thinking about this. So yeah, I'd say, if you want to do this fellowship, you can get so much out of it. It's, any agency essentially you can work with. It could be NASA, it could be NIH, it could be USA, State Department. So I mean, just finding an interest in any one of those agencies and then honing in on that and getting as much information as you can and using that to shape your application, I think would be really impactful.
Peter?
Yeah, so, and actually I have similar advice. I think Ankunda makes a good point that you need to have a well-articulated, proposition, right? You need to really explain that you're serious about this, that you've engaged in a lot of thought about what you want to do, and then, walk the walk. So have the resume diversification of experiences, write a well-articulated personal statement. When you get to the interview process, have really, either studied the issues through classes or interest groups, or have, been worked with a nonprofit so that you can own your interest and your passion. But also don't worry too much about what exactly that is. So for instance, when I first applied, I wanted to be in science diplomacy. I read a lot about science diplomacy and I was like, wow, this is for me, this is what I want to do. And then as I actually got more into the DC space and into policy, I realized that actually wasn't what interested me the most. What interests me the most is trying to, do a better job at translating scientific R&D into economic advantage, right? Into progress on the technological side. So I've really kind of changed my interest over that time. But Ankunda's right, you should kind of pick a direction, pick a story, and really try and focus and hone in on that in your application process.
So once again, thank you. If I didn't get a chance to get to your questions today, please shoot us an email. Join us August 1st for our Facebook Live, where we will talk about life after the fellowship, and we'll hear from two fellows there. So again, thank you so much for participating in a panelist. Thank you so much for participating as a panelist, and then audience members, thank you so much for listening. Have a great afternoon.